Okay, so we're going to begin the book of Tehillim, Psalms today. Hopefully we'll be giving a regular class in the book of Psalms. It's going to be greatly text-based, as I mentioned before we started taping. It's a fascinating thing that the book of Tehillim, really you can literally focus on every single word and derive a lot of wisdom from every little inference that we can find here in the verses. It's absolutely amazing. We're going to be using the commentaries in the Mikrot Gedolot, which is the classical, how should I say, book in which all the commentaries, the classical commentaries, are lined up on the page. You have the actual Tanakh text is usually in bold, and the commentaries are there all around, similar to a Talmudic page, where you have the bold, large text is the original text, and then the commentaries surround that. Similarly, in the Mikrot Gedolot Hebrew, similarly, you have the text of the Tanakh here at Tehillim, and around there are the classical commentaries. So you have Rashi, the Metzudat David, Radak, the Ibn Ezra, and the Malbim. I'm going to be drawing primarily from Rashi and the Malbim. As you most likely know, Rashi was a medieval scholar, Rabbeinu Shlomo Yitzchaki, Rabbi Shlomo, the son of Isaac. We're also going to be drawing, as I said, from the Malbim. The Malbim is a much more recent scholar. The Malbim lived from 1809 till, I believe, 1879. And he was a rabbi in Europe and primarily in Eastern Europe, and lived during that turbulent time of Enlightenment. And he actually was very involved in the opposition to the Reform movement and other assimilationist movements. Okay, let's begin. The first verse, the first pasuk. Ashrei ha'ish asher lo halach b'atzas v'shaim u'b'derech hata'im lo amad u'moshav leitzim lo yashav. The English translation: fortunate is the man that has not walked in the counsel of the wicked, nor stood in the path of sinners, nor sat in the company of scoffers. Now, first of all, the first word is ashrei. Ashrei is translated in English fortunate. The truth is, it's not that clear exactly what ashrei means. Ashrei is given by different commentators various meanings, although there's clearly a relationship between the meanings. The word osher is generally said to mean actually happiness. And today in modern Hebrew, osher with an aleph means happy. And there are commentaries that understand that the meaning here of the verse, or actually the word in the verse, the first word, also means happy. Ashrei ha'ish asher lo halach, that someone who doesn't walk in the path of the wicked, etc., that he's happy. And they actually, to a certain extent, the Malbim follows that interpretation to a certain extent. It also means praiseworthy. The Metzudat Zion learns that way. The Metzudat Zion says, Inyan shevach utila. It's a matter of praise and exaltation. And that's the meaning of the word. It also reflects a form of success and completeness. So as you can see, all these words are related. If someone is acquired something of great value within their life, they've reached a point of meaning, then they're also fortunate, aren't they? So all these words are interconnected. All these meanings are interconnected. Now, it's interesting that the book of Dvarim, the book of the Chumash, finishes on a verse that also has Ashrei in it. And the Midrash comments that there's a flow here, that Moshe Rabbeinu finishes with Ashrei, and David HaMelech and King David begins with Ashrei. Another interesting point is that Tehillim has 5 books. As we know that the book of Moshe Rabbeinu, that the Chumash also has 5 books. Clearly, the book of Tehillim and the book of the Chumash are paralleling each other, although they're on totally different levels. Moses was Ish Elokim, the verse tells us. He was a man of God. He was on a very, very high level. And I would say to a certain extent that the 5 books are less accessible, a lot less accessible than the book of Tehillim, where it really speaks to you. The book of Tehillim is something that, as you read it, many of you probably do, it's something we use in our prayers every single day because it speaks to human struggles. It speaks to human questions of faith, as well as it also repeats a lot of the story of the Chumash in various chapters. So there's a lot of relationships, but yet at the same time, Tehillim is down on our level. It's down on more of a human level than the Chumash. The 5 books of Moses is really on a level which is a bit removed from us. It takes a lot of things for granted about understanding of God that in the book of Tehillim, King David seems to struggle with. Not so simple. He's very upset about seeing the wicked prosper. You don't really see that in the Chumash because those things to Moses didn't bother him. He was on a much higher level. But on the book in Tehillim, King David is disturbed by that. So this is really, in a certain sense, you could say, the 5 books, the books of Moses is the book of laws. But the Tehillim is really a book for us. It's really a book that I think, I'm sure most of you would agree with me, that it's a book that really speaks to us, speaks to our own struggles to a great extent. But what's interesting is that they're parallel, to tell you that, through these struggles and so on, this is really a continuation. The book of the 5 books is from God's perspective, you could say, and the book of Tehillim is from man's perspective to a great extent. And you see that in all the different, as you go through from the prophets to the writings, it's kind of the Torah becomes kind of humanized more from a more and more human perspective. But let's get back to some of the more of the syntax here in the verse. Again, we're starting with Ashrei, and we say that Ashrei ha'ish asher lo halach b'tzat r'shaim. Happy and fortunate is a man who doesn't walk in the counsel of the wicked. So first of all, why do we start talking about the person is lucky or happy not to walk in the path of the wicked? We could have said it the other way around. We could have said, cursed is the man who follows in the path of the wicked. Right? So this question is actually broached by the Midrash. The Midrash tells us that David HaMelech, King David, didn't want to start with a curse, and he wanted to teach us a lesson about how to speak, and I think also how to think. He didn't want to say words that were negative. He didn't want to let a curse out of his mouth, particularly to start the entire book with a curse. So instead, he turned it around, and he said that somebody who doesn't follow the ways of the wicked will be blessed, even though they're both true. And it would be more direct to have said, someone who follows the path of the wicked is going to be cursed. And again, in the book, in the Chumash, in Deuteronomy, we do find that in the covenant and the Jordan, that the children of Israel were told directly to curse, right? Cursed is the man who doesn't follow, who doesn't keep the Torah. So, again, from Moses' perspective, it seems like that was appropriate. But from David's perspective, or from where he is standing in his reality, more closer to ours, it's not. But in any event, it's teaching us to think positive, think from a positive approach of how to look at things, and also emphasizing and teach us the lesson of our speech, that even to the extent of saying something negative in a negative emphasis, even though it's true, is also inappropriate. And the truth is, our sages learned this from Noah, from the story of Noah, and when God spoke to Noah and told him to separate various animals. There it says that God told Noah that you should take 2 by 2 of animals that are not pure, but animals are pure, you take 7. So from this, we learn a similar message, because it could have just said impure animals. But when God spoke to Noah, he didn't say that. He said animals that are not pure and animals that are pure. So once again, there's this extreme care of how to speak, and it's extremely important. Extremely important. The same mouth that we speak with to our friends, to our colleagues, is the same mouth that we're praying to God with, the same mouth that we study Torah with. And if we want those prayers to reach where they need to go, then we have to be careful with what we speak all day. That should be the appropriate conduit in order for the prayers to be released from there. For this to be for a person's mouth to be the source. Another question. Why does the verse say ha'ish? Fortunate or happy is the man, asher lo halach. Where do we find this language of ish? We find that Moses is called ish. Ha'ish Moshe. We also find that, again, Noah is called ish. It's called man. But again, there's many words in Hebrew for a man or a human being. Adam is one. Enosh is another one. Particularly more relating to the male gender, Gever is another one. So why do we use this language of ish here? Or I could say it another way. We don't even have to say anything. We could just say, skip the word ish. We could say ashrei asher lo halach. Fortunate is happy is one who doesn't walk in the counsel of the wicked. Why do we have to say the man or the human being? So here the Malbim explains that similar to the examples I gave you, an ish means someone of importance, of spiritual stature. And Malbim explains that the reason that we say ish is to distinguish actually between man and the animals. He makes a very interesting point. And he says that there are different types of success, and there's different types of forms of completeness that a person can achieve in their life. But he says some of them, actually the animals are more successful than we are just as much. They're not really particular to human beings. And what are those? He says when it comes to physical accomplishments, he says animals have those too. How so? He says, well, for example, let's say sustenance. He says there are many animals that are able to forage for food and eat foods that human beings can't. They can eat all kinds of things. So they never go hungry because they can always find something that works for them, such as the pig. That's one thing he says. Then he says in the same thing in terms of finding shelter. Some animals don't even need shelter because they're so well furred. Then he goes on to say, what about physical prowess? He says, well, obviously we all know many animals are larger than human beings and have many different physical prowess and abilities that human beings don't have, whether it's certain birds have much better eyesight or lions and tigers and bears are so much more powerful. But when it comes to spiritual pursuits, that's only a human being. That's only the human being who has the divine soul is related to those type of things. And again, a very important thing to meditate about, you know, in terms of how it is that we want to develop ourselves in our lives. Do we want to develop ourselves as we are as a human? And that is our emphasis in life? Or is our emphasis in life, and when we look in the mirror, do we see an animal standing on two legs? That's not to say that our physical needs are not important. Of course they are. But it's a question of emphasis, it's a question of, you know, what's the main goal? And what are the things that we need to help us along to get there? I just want to relate back that the Midrash says, actually specifically, that this verse is an allusion to actually different personalities in the Tanakh. Some of them that I previously mentioned. That the reason it says Ish here is actually it's a reference to certain characters, certain great people of the Bible, the Hebrew Bible, that are being praised here by King David. So I already mentioned one of them, which is Noah. There's one interpretation here that this is talking about Noah, that he kept away from the generation of the flood and kept away from their ways, and that this verse is referring to him. There's another interpretation that this verse is referring to Abraham, and it's referring to Abraham staying away from the generation of the Tower of Babel. That's another interpretation of the Midrash. And finally, the Midrash says that the verse here is referring to the sons of Korah. Korah was the one that rebelled against Moses, and the sages tell us that his sons repented at the last moment, and kind of a mountain rose up from the pit that was swallowing up the camp of Korah, and they were saved. So the Midrash says this is a reference to them, that they kept away from the counsel of Korah, and this verse is praising them. So in any event, but the point is that the word Ish refers to someone unique, a person of stature, and the question is, which one is it referring to? Of course, that itself is interesting because, you know, you'd think if we're talking about somebody of stature, then is really their greatest compliment that they don't mingle in some way with the wicked? Is that the most we could say about them? Now, it's true that in the next verse, which we haven't even read yet, it goes on to say that this particular person we're talking about, that he converses in the Torah of God, etc., and he goes on to talk about what positive things he does. But I believe here we're starting from the beginning. And in the beginning of serving Hashem, the first thing a person has to do is to get away from bad influences, obviously. A person has to stay away from the bad influences. But I think what's also interesting is that the fight within a person, the inner struggle, is not so much about doing the positive commandments or even doing good deeds. I think really the hardest struggle for a person is this first part. The hardest struggle is to stay away from the negative behavior that an individual is drawn from. I mean, the second part is so much easier because we're all made up of different forces, meaning to say people have different inclinations. There's the positive and negative forces, and there are times and there is elements of a person that, of course, are generous. There are times when a person wants a spiritual moment. So that's really so much the issue. The bigger issue is what about those urges that are inappropriate? What about those social settings that are inappropriate that can lead a person to normalize, or do lead a person to normalize behavior and activities that go against Hashem's will? That's a lot harder. And if the truth is, if you think about, religious people, or if I think about the Jewish observant community, I think really what stands out more is the things that we don't do, that we don't get involved with, and we stay away from. I mean, I think that really is, there's really a lot more, it seems like almost like the soul is a lot more active in those areas, even though, of course, you have to be busy preparing for Passover or Rosh Hashanah or so on, and Shabbos, it's so important, of course. But on the other hand, it seems like staying away and refraining, I think especially in this day and age, from watching certain things or going certain places, seems to really make us stand out a lot more. It's really in this society, the fact that a person wants, especially nowadays, a person wants a spiritual experience. Everybody gets that. You want to meditate, that's great. You want to pray, meditate, that's awesome. But why can't you go to the club, or why don't you want to go to the bar, or why, those type of questions, or again, exerting self-control, in dating situations and things like that. Those are things that are really hard. Those are things that are tougher. When it comes to human sexuality, those things are really when a person has to really exert self-control. And I think it's really within those struggles that a person really grows spiritually. It's through the self-sacrifice that a person really changes into another human being. And then you really become the right conduit for the positive. I mean, you think of Shabbos. We were, the observant Jews, they refrain from doing so many activities. That creates the right space. Now you have a space for prayer. Now you have a space for, sanctifying the day. Because you're refraining. But the abstaining is so important. That's creating the space. The same thing within the person. Abstaining is what creates the holy space. Abstaining is what makes the person the proper vessel in order to absorb holiness. Without that, it's not possible. I actually like to say from a mystical perspective that that's actually the objective, the mystical undertone of the Noahide laws. There's often people feel the Noahide laws, but there's no Shabbos, there's all the positive stuff are missing. It seems like, it's kind of bland, there's nothing much going on, but in reality, that's really where the pedal hits hits the metal. Is that how they say it? That's really where it's tough, though. That's really where it's tough in those areas where, a person lives in a society like Noah. I mean, this verse is going down in history. Ashrei ha'ish. This is really a prophetic statement. This is something that the heavens are singing about a person like Noah, who keeps himself separate. It's a very difficult thing to do, to be alone. It's not an easy thing. But a person is not alone. Somebody once approached the Lubavitcher Rebbe and told him that he has a son that's autistic. And then he added to that with a little bit of a explanation that his son has problems in social settings. He really doesn't have friends, and so on. And so the Rebbe said, so he's alone, so he has more time to be just him and God. That was his response. But there's a lot of truth to that. So yes, the point is, Ashrei ha'ish, asher lo halach b'atzas r'shaim. Happy and fortunate and praiseworthy is the man who doesn't walk in the counsel of the wicked. somebody who does this, in reality, they're already an ish. Meaning to say, they're already a person of who's their piece of them that's in there in the image of God is already, it's already active. It's active. It's not that, in other words, for someone to have the sensitivity to feel that's not a place where I belong. I don't belong in that place. Like I said, that's really a greater sign that the soul is active to some extent than doing a mitzvah. Because the evil inclination is okay with you doing a mitzvah once in a while, as long as you do what he wants when he wants you to. He's totally okay with it. Because people then feel self-satisfied. They feel vindicated. They feel suddenly, they feel, worthwhile. So in certain ways, God forbid, the energy, the juice coming from the positive, where the person now feels like a person and satisfies the human and maybe divine element, that can fuel that later they can do something else because now they don't feel so bad about themselves anymore. So God forbid the mitzvah could be used in order to fuel more sinning, God forbid. But when the person's inner struggle is going on, and they're being pulled towards a forbidden sexual relation, they're being pulled towards greed, towards some type of theft, or they're being pulled by their anger to hurt someone, and they don't do it, how do they accomplish that? How is that accomplished? So in the book Tanya, the Rabbi Shneur Zalman of Liadi, the first Rebbe of Chabad, explains that the divine soul has to become active when a person's, as Hasidic thought explains it, when the animal-like soul tries to control the body to do something against God's will, so the divine soul has to be activated in order for that to stop, in order to control the person, not to do it. So that's why here we have to say ish, specifically. It has to say that praiseworthy is the man of, in other words, the person of importance, the person who is at least a potential of a full-statured person, where that potential is activated. Because that is the type of person who will not walk in the counsel of the wicked, etc. Let's look now at the rest of the verse a little bit. So Asher lo halach batzas v'shaim. So this person doesn't walk in the eitzah, as the advice of the wicked. And he doesn't stand in the path of the sinners. And in the place or the settlement of scoffers, he doesn't sit. So it's interesting that we say here that he doesn't walk with the counsel of the wicked. So walking is less permanent than sitting, right? And sitting is less permanent. Walking is less permanent than standing, and standing is less permanent than sitting. Now Rashi comments on this, and Rashi says that this person is praiseworthy because since they didn't walk, they didn't come to stand. Because they didn't stand, they didn't come to sit. In other words, they're all different levels of permanency, getting close to sin or getting close to a social group which is involved in transgressive behavior and negative behavior. So what we're saying is that, according to Rashi at least, the reason we're talking first about walking, then standing and sitting, is because this person is praiseworthy for not walking, because that's so temporary. It's like you're walking past something. You're not really involved with them. You're just passing by. So this person doesn't even pass by that area. He stays away from it. And because of that, he never came to stand with them. Because of that, he never came to sit down. So this is also a very important principle in Judaism, which I'm sure you probably came across already. And I remember hearing about it in yeshiva also all the time, and that is, once you already facing the test, you're in trouble. The idea is not to put yourself in the situation as much as possible to get into a situation where you'll be tested in a very serious way. In other words, the concept in Judaism of putting a fence around the law. It's exactly what the verse is talking about. But in this context, he seems to be talking about a social context of staying away from certain groups of people, which is going to lead a person in the wrong direction. Also a difficult thing to do, because every human being is searching for, again, not to be lonely and to have social relationships. But nevertheless, what we're saying here, because a person could have a tendency to say, look, I'll just pass by, say hello a little bit, what's the harm? They're kind of fun or whatever it is, we'll slap each other on the back. I mean, it's not really a big deal. But the verse is telling us that that's not a praiseworthy person. A praiseworthy person stays far away. It's a difficult thing. I mean, it's kind of like the complaint about Orthodox Jews or other religious, observant Jews or other people who are trying to be careful in their religious practice. Why do you keep yourselves apart? And it's a difficult thing, and people are bound to feel that way, or maybe bound to feel like, what's with why are you so snooty? Why can't you hang out with everybody else? So again, it's a sacrifice. It's a difficult thing to do, but there's an expression in the Talmud, divrei harav divrei talmid, divrei mishomin, which means if your teacher tells you something and a fellow student tells you something, who do you listen to? So in other words, social pressures shouldn't stop a person from following the will of God. That's basically what we're saying here. Person has to have the courage. It's key. It's the first law in the Shulchan Aruch, that even if people mock you, you should be proud and continue to conduct yourself according to the law. I think that that particular form of test, again, it's really so appropriate in this generation more than any other, because religious people are very much mocked today, especially in Western civilization. Bible thumpers, all kinds of names people who are religious are called. But we have to remember, we have to listen. It's not just really listening to God from the outside, but it's listening to our own soul, it's listening to our own spiritual voice, and listening to that voice and not listening to those other voices, and again, within those sacrifices, that's where a person really shines and becomes a different human being. But that's the rule, the principle Rashi is here telling us. This very, very important principle in Judaism, that a person has to stay away from environments that bring them to sin. Stay away from environments also that accept as normative behavior and normative thinking, ways that are completely contrary to Judaism. It's also extremely important. I mean, I don't think the Jewish people would have lasted till now if they didn't do that. You can't. Maimonides discusses it, and I think everyone understands this, that a human being no matter how smart you are, you're affected by your environment. If what everyone's doing around you, no matter how stupid it is, you get used to it. And you start feeling like that's the way, that's normal. It becomes normative. And no matter how bad it is, you eventually get used to it and even agree with it. So that's why it's so important to keep those type of distances. Person maybe has various different types of relationships, but to whatever extent possible, person has to create an island for themselves where they can stay true to Jewish values, to the values of the Torah. Now, the Malbim points out here that the verse refers to wicked in three different ways. There's Reshaim, there's Chataim, and Leitzim. Now, just in the English translation, Reshaim are wicked, Chataim are sinners. Leitzim is really a total different category. It's just simply people that mock and make fun. It doesn't necessarily imply any actual sin. Now, what is wicked as opposed to sinner? What's the difference? So the Malbim explains that the Rishayim we're talking here about is people who are wicked in the way they think. And that makes sense because the previous word is atzas, which is advice. We're talking about counsel, which is talking about how we think. So a person should not even walk among them. I think the interpretation would be according to that even something as temporary as even walking among people whose very values are contrary, who are heretical, is a bad idea. He says that Chataim, on the other hand, are people who are sinners because of due to their uncontrolled passion, their inability to control themselves, but it's not thought out. It's not something that's part of their value system. It's just they can't control themselves. So that isn't as bad, and that is lo amad. You can have some type of relationship. You can be in some degree of their orbit, but not to stand. So in other words, not that degree of permanency. Now, scoffers, they're not really sinners at all. However, you don't want to yashav. You don't want to sit with them in any permanent way. Because what happens if you do? Rashi says, if someone has a level of, they're sitting there dwelling with such people, then you never get to the positive side. At the very least, a person doesn't study Torah, a person doesn't engage in good deeds and in prayer, etc. Okay. I was thinking of a different interpretation. Slightly different, based on the Malbim, but slightly different. As he said, the Rashayim are wicked. Those are the people who transgress Hashem's will, b'meizid, purposely, intentionally. The derech chatayim, sinners, those are people who transgress God's will unintentionally. We find the word chet in Leviticus many times refers to a sin that's unintentional, for which a person is obligated to bring some form of offering. Leitzim, again, is another level. It's not actually a sin at all, at least not in the strict sense of the word, but it's someone who scoffs and doesn't take divine service seriously. So if we look at these different words, to walk, stand, and sit, we can actually look at those words in a way a bit opposite of the way Rashi interprets it. Walking is something that it's continuous, and it's also something that's advancing. When somebody is walking towards something, they're getting closer to their destination. So now, when someone befriends the wicked and becomes like a wicked person, and therefore, by osmosis or through that relationship, starts thinking like a wicked person, what's the result? They begin down a path. Well, if the person's mind thinks in a wicked fashion, then that's something that advances. It's not just one act. It's something that's continuous. And it's something that once a person's conclusions go down a path that are contrary to faith, they go down a path that prefer hedonistic behavior. That's something that continues. It's avera goreret avera. One sin brings on the next one. And so that's a halach. When someone is wicked or is befriending, and within that circle, they begin to become a halach. They begin to become someone that's advancing on that path, God forbid. So that's actually worse. But derech hateim lo amad, when a person stands up, it's what they do right before they're ready to walk, right? First, in other words, if we start at the beginning, let's put it this way. A person's sitting in a seated position in their home or lying down in a bed. So first they sit up, then they stand, and then they walk, right? So we're going in backwards order. So we're saying in relation to the wicked, the person is advancing and going down a bad road. If a person isn't careful, though, and they're doing unintentional sins because they haven't learned, or they're just not careful, so they're on the precipice. They're right, kind of hanging, they're hanging over the cliff because of their lack of care. Very close to where the next step will be. It'll go from a place of lackadaisicalness where they're doing things unintentionally because they haven't learned and they're not careful. And the next step where they're actually walking down the path of the wicked. So that's another way to look at it. That the chataim is they're standing. They're, unfortunately, if a person isn't careful and does a lot of unintentional sins, the line, the next step would be to walk down the path of the wicked. Moshav leitzim lo yashav is the least of the three. Person is seated, and from seating he can't do anything. He's not doing anything positive, but he's 2 steps away from someone whose entire frame of reference in life leads him from one sin to another sin to another sin. This person may actually completely have the right values. He's just too lazy. He's just too lazy to do positive. That's why he's called a lates. He's called a scoffer because he just doesn't take it seriously enough to get himself going and do any good deeds. He'd rather just take it easy and relax. But he's careful when it comes to doing anything negative. He won't do anything wrong. In fact, maybe he'll even tell you, well, I don't want to do anything because if I do something, I may unintentionally do a sin. So he's the type of person he'd rather just not do anything. Just very inactive, passive. He just wants to just stay in his house, and that's it. He doesn't want to reach out. He's afraid maybe he's even afraid somehow he may do some type of sin. So he's just sitting. But the problem is that sitting is also not walking down a good path. He's completely immobile. He's just, he's like a rock. So the person who's praiseworthy doesn't do any of these 3 things. Okay. So that's the first verse, pretty much. Let's take a look at the second verse. So now we say, Ki'im b'toras Hashem chefzo, v'saraso yageh yomam v'layla. In other words, the opposite extreme, or the laws of physics here is that the person who stays away from the first activity, what is he doing? What is he doing? Well, let me read the English. Rather, his desire is in the Torah of the Lord, and his Torah he meditates day and night. So, the verse here tells us that this person who stayed away from sin in all the ways that we previously mentioned is praiseworthy, but that's not enough. His praiseworthy then stems forth from the positive, that his desire is in the Torah of Hashem. And in his Torah, he meditates day and night. Now, a couple of questions on this verse. We start off by saying Torah Hashem, the Torah of the Lord, right? Is his desire. Chefzo means desire. Then we say, B'saraso yageh. What does saraso mean? His Torah. So is it God's Torah or is it his Torah? In the middle of the verse, it changes. Start by saying that it's God's Torah, and then it says it's his. Which is it? So Rashi comments. Rashi picks up on this discrepancy. Rashi comments, B'saraso yageh, b'tchila hi nikreis Toras Hashem. In the beginning, the Torah is called Hashem's Torah. But when a person works hard in Torah to understand it, he nikreis Torah, so then it's called the person's Torah. So you see a fascinating thing here. So the divine wisdom and knowledge can become the person's knowledge. Anyone who studies Torah, I think, has experienced this. Because usually when people think about religion, and, you know, particularly Judaism, secular people get an image of someone who's giving up the self, where they're being oppressed by this supreme being who's telling them exactly what to do, like a bunch of robots, and basically they disappear. They have no self anymore. They're basically, just remote control. There's a big man with a long beard in heaven, and he's remote controlling everyone around. So, but I mean, Torah does mean instruction. So, before a person begins studying Torah, there certainly is that fear or more misunderstanding, that, and a kind of feeling an aversion. Well, what is this book going to tell me I can't do? I don't know if I'm comfortable with all this stuff. Someone controlling my life. I need to be in control of my own life. But what's so fascinating about it is that the more you study it, the more that your own brain and your own mode of thinking starts to move in line with the Torah. And suddenly it's kind of really, you're making the choices based on the standards and the wisdom that you've learned. And it's not that you're not a thinking person. You're a more thinking person than you were before. You're more sensitive. You're more aware. You're looking at the world differently, and you feel suddenly like you're on to a different level. You're looking down from the airplane down on Earth and everything that's going on. Suddenly, and also you're more in control. Actually, you're actually more of a person than you were before, because now you're actually in control of your actions more. Your intellect has more control over your emotions. So you don't feel, oh my gosh, what did I do? I'm so out of control. I can't believe what I did, and I'm embarrassed. So it becomes Torah, it becomes his Torah, it becomes the person's Torah. And what's amazing is that we see from the Talmud that Hashem is so happy with that. Hashem wants the human beings to take the Torah standards and apply them as using the human mind. That's what Hashem wants. Of course, according to the standards that the sages have presented to us. But yet, even with that, there's often different ways, and different souls find slightly different ways to approach situations. We have to follow the Torah sages, of course. But it's just an amazing phenomenon. It's not something you can really understand unless you're a part of it. That despite the fact that there are all these rules, as everyone says, there's so many rules, but yet there's something liberating about it. You feel like it's your rules. You feel like, I agree with those. It makes sense, and it's done in a reasonable fashion. It's telling you, how to do things in a reasonable way, and also how to do things in such a significant way. It really depends on the way the person's looking at it, Yeah, some people may find it a little strange that somebody tells me how to tie my shoes in the morning, which shoelace to tie first. But I got to do it some way, right? But seriously, the halacha says that that a Jew should tie their left shoelace first, just like you wrap your tefillin on your left hand. Isn't that an amazing thing? So that when you're tying your shoes, there's an allusion to putting on tefillin. That's an amazing thing. That's very profound. That means even just tying shoes, your mind is putting on tefillin. That's unbelievable. So in other words, it's that message that I'm sure you've heard so many times, that the most mundane things are being uplifted, are being sanctified. The most mundane, simple things. Now they have value. They have so much more value. So much more value. I think it's an interesting thing because when you ask people like, listen, I can give you a map because you don't know the area, or a GPS, or you can try to figure it out on your own. Nobody's going to say, well, you know what, I don't want to be some map telling me what to do. I'm just going to go, I'll just by luck, I'll take any street I feel like it. No one would do something like that. For some reason, people think that in life that they should just, start from scratch, and, they're not interested in what the satellite tells them. I mean, in other words, when I say the satellite, I'm talking about the Almighty, the Creator. Who knows the system better than Him? Why would you want to just from scratch do it all by yourself? You may never get there. Probably won't. History shows that the success rate alone is pretty bad. Chazal tell us, the sages say, that Barasi Yetzirah, Barasi Torah Tavlin, that I created the evil inclination, right? And I created its cure as the Torah. There's no other cure. Bottom line, there is no other cure, I promise you. It's the only cure. Person can do many good deeds, but they're not going to be in control. They're going to be out of control. It's the only way that a person can be in control, because the Torah is the GPS of the soul. It speaks to the soul, and when the soul hears it, its ears perk up. And the soul of the person becomes more conscious within the person. That's another thing. Why is it called your Torah? Because the person's soul knows it already. You really know it. That's why you feel like, yeah, this is mine. Because in reality, it is talking to you. Something that, the Medrash says that 40 days before a child's born, the angel comes and teaches it the whole Torah. Then the angel hits it on its lip, and the infant forgets. And I'm sure it's the same thing for Ben Noach. It's exactly the same thing. The potential, the knowledge is there. God isn't coming with tricks for his creations. It's already within the potential. It's already innately within the person. Which is why all the person really has to do is get a little bit of humility and open their mind a little bit. And if they do that, they'll soon find out they'll be very happy. Be a changed human being. Suddenly, their relationships are better. Their struggles they have in their marriage and at work, things are totally changed all of a sudden. That's why Moses told the children of Israel, this is for your own good. For your own good. In reality, people think that, stop trying to control me, and so on and so forth. But we all know that to be happy human beings, we have to discipline ourselves. And if our mind isn't in control, then there's going to be a lot of train wrecks. And the Torah is the only thing that can help us do that. So, also, I'd like to add, just came to my mind, famous Mishnah in the Ethics of the Fathers that says that a person that studies Torah for its own sake, that he's like a natural spring that continues to flow and like a geyser that keeps coming up and up and up. Amayanem is gaber. There's a certain, it's like art. There's a certain quality, spiritual quality of the soul, its own creativity that comes to life with Torah study. It really does. And the more you study, it awakens that within the person. The truth is, two people can study the same Meforash, or the same piece of Talmud, or the same verse in a Bible, and see different messages. They're both true, but this one speaks to each person's soul, and they pick it up. And the physical world is similar, and two people can pass a certain scene and take different messages. But here we're talking about the soul is literally picking up different messages, and bridging it through a person's intellect. Okay. But Rashi does say one thing though. Misha Omalba. If a person toils over it, it is a toil. It is difficult. It's not easy. The more a person toils, the more it's his. The more liberated the person is. Okay. If I have more time. We could start the next verse quickly. It says, shall be like a tree planted by streams of water, that yields its fruit in its season, and whose leaf does not wither, and all that he does shall prosper. We don't really have a lot of time to go into all the details of this next verse, but what do see? Again, this concept of growth. That the person who toiled in Torah is going to be like a tree planted by streams of waters. Now, a tree planted by streams of waters is always irrigated. So it's always giving forth sweet fruit. It's that idea of growth, of constant newness. And also the fact that the tree is a blessing to its whole environment. It's a fruit tree. So not only is it itself healthy, but also it's providing sustenance and pleasantness to everyone around it. We will continue more on this verse next time.